Welcome everyone to another episode of Expecto Podcastium. This is Erica, I'm one of your hosts.
Hi, I'm Mega. I'm enjoying cleaning my room today.
Hey, I'm Jess, and I just came home from work, so I am very happy to be home.
I am drinking this new tea that I got. It's like this raspberry cream one with rooibos, and it's really yummy. I don't drink coffee. I'm one of those people. Some people are like shocked by that, and they're like, "Why don't you drink coffee?" And I say, "Well, I just don't like the flavor." And they say, "Oh, you'll get used to it." And I answer like, "I'm not gonna force myself to drink something that I don't like just so that I can like it." Also, like I would have to go and buy like coffee making stuff, and I don't want to do that. I'm fine with my tea.
Mood.
Exactly.
I also don't like coffee. It's so weird because like everyone else likes coffee so much, and I just also don't like the taste of it at all. And people have said the same thing to me. But I just don't like coffee. I'm like a freaking bloodhound with coffee. If I like taste any coffee at all, I know I won't like it. I'm like one of those annoying fussy eaters. You know, those like toddlers who just won't eat anything if they see a little speck of green in it. So I'm like that with coffee. Anyway, and then also, Erica, did you say rooibos?
Yeah, rooibos tea.
So rooibos is actually Afrikaans for red bush because rooibos comes from South Africa.
Oh, cool.
Huh.
Yeah,
It only grows here.
I really don't like coffee. Like I can't even eat like coffee crisp. It's just the flavor of it is not pleasant in my mouth. Why do you say it like that? So this episode we are going to discuss chapters 6, 7, and 8 from Philosopher's Stone. And Jess and I are major procrastinators and literally just read chapter 8. Yeah, we're the same person. We're Gred and Forge, but we're
Oh God, don't say.
and Dricka? Issa and Dricka? Does that make sense? Yeah, we're Issa
Yes. And something that Jess pointed out was that Jerica is the name of a character in Servant, which Rupert Grint starring in.
Jericho.
No, is Jericho
Yeah.
the name of the name?
Yeah, it is.
The name of the
It's a
name.
good show. If anyone wants to find a good show to watch, it's Servant, which like Rupert Grint is in. It's actually really good. It's like kind of a horror show, but it's not horror. It's more just kind of like icky or creepy, but like that's what makes it good. Suspenseful, yeah.
If it's Jericho, then maybe Rupert Grint's like part of the Marvel series because Jericho's a weapon in the Marvel universe. So, shall we begin?
Yes, we shall. So, chapter 6, we have the journey from platform 9 3/4. So, this is where we get introduced to a bunch of awesome characters. This chapter is always really fun because it's like Harry's just so happy and excited. And one thing that I love with the beginning here is Harry's trying to figure out a way to ask the Dursleys if they can like drive him to King's Cross. And he said this thing about Dudley being scared of him. And so Harry goes downstairs and he's trying to get Vernon's attention and Dudley just like screams and runs away.
Yeah.
I laughed a lot when I saw that. It's just like, run away.
The difference that magic can do, you know?
Yeah.
So Harry arrives at King's Cross and he's a little worried because he's like, how do I find this place? How do I find this place? And then we hear Molly Weasley. Molly Weasley just reminds you of warmth, doesn't she? Whenever I think about her, I just think of like warmth and happiness. She's just like this sweet motherly. I love mommy.
She's like literally the personification of like hearth and home. That's
Yeah,
what she is. And yeah, so obviously she brings like very nice energies and feelings of comfort.
yeah, exactly. And then we get introduced to our Weasleys. I
Yeah.
love the Weasleys. Weasleys are the best. The thing that I like about the way she introduces them is when I say she, I mean like J.K. Rowling, is she describes each of them like differently. It's not just like, oh, just a bunch of redheads. It's like, well, she says like in the beginning it says that they're all redheads, but then we go and we kind of get introduced to each of them, and she describes the way they look more. And then
Yeah.
there's the introduction of our favorite person, Ronald Weasley, just being all tall and thin and gangly.
And kind of awkward, you know?
Yeah.
Kind of awkward and sweet.
Bumbling. He's bumbling. And I love that. He's yeah. We definitely get like a true introduction to Ron there. I also like how like once they're on the train, he just kind of bumbles rants, and then Harry apparently like after he says a bunch of stuff, Harry's like he notices that Ron probably feels like he shouldn't have said that or something. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
like
like actually right here it says he was tall, thin and gangling with freckles, big hands and big feet and a long nose. Which is like so cute. And then yeah, I know what you're talking about, Erica, where he realizes that he probably shouldn't have said that thing.
That thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also love how, like, even though Ron's kind of like awkward and weird and like asks straight out about like the scar and everything when they first meet, and it's kind of just like, you know, I love how J.K. Rowling like mentioned that Harry found Ron just as interesting as Ron found him. So there's like that instant like maybe Ron's being a little bit like nosy and pushy, but Harry finds him just as interesting, and he's just as interested in like pushing and learning about Ron. It's like
Mm-hmm.
immediate mutual like friendship.
yeah, like Harry doesn't at all like judge Ron. He's like even when Ron goes and says how they can't afford something, Harry just like brushes it off. He's like, that doesn't matter. That's fine. And he doesn't like feel pity towards Ron. When people say so often that Harry just feels pity towards Ron not being able to afford stuff, but that's not at all the truth. The reason why he bought all those snacks was because there's all these new things that he wanted to try, and he wanted his friend to try them too. He wanted his friend to have some candy. They were boys. They were kids. They want candy. When I was a kid, I'd want any candy. Like it doesn't matter if
Exactly.
I could afford it or not. My friends got some candy. We shared the candy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean like what would you do if you suddenly had like a whole lot of money and you saw this like big cart full of like candy and sweets and delicious treats? You're like 11 years old. You're gonna buy all of it. If I had that money and I walked into a sweet shop, I would have like my eyes would have like turned into saucers and I would have just grabbed anything that I could.
Exactly. And so this is like the first chance, like you mentioned, Jess. Like Harry suddenly has the money to buy these things. He suddenly has the ability to like indulge in what he wants, and of course he's gonna share it with his first friend, the person who like is talking with them and is liking hanging out with him. And then I feel like there's also a part of Harry that like recognizes when Ron says they're like, "Oh, I have sandwiches," and "Oh, I don't like corned beef and stuff." I feel like Harry would have recognized that and been like, "Oh, well, I can help you. I can give you lots of food. Why not? You're my friend. I'll like share what I have with you."
Exactly. And the first interaction between Ron and Harry is just like it's iconic. Just meeting a new friend, eating candy. Like I also like how Ron finds out that he's Harry Potter, and he's all like in shock. But then it's just kind of like he's his friend. It's not like, oh my god, I'm with a celebrity. I'm talking with this blah blah. But the heartbreaking part is when like Ron basically talks about how he's got so much to live up to with his brothers. It just breaks your heart a little bit. And the one line that he says, I have to find the exact line here. Hold on a sec.
I think it's so sad because, like, he's only 11. What kind of, like, 11-year-old thinks about that stuff? You know? At, like, 11 years old, you should be thinking about, like, sports and sweets and cars or whatever their obsession is at the time. You shouldn't be, like, thinking about how you're never gonna, like, accomplish anything that, like, your brothers haven't.
And here's the line that always breaks my heart. Everyone expects me to do as well as the others, but if I do, it's no big deal because they did it first. That just like breaks my heart because it's actually true. When you think about it, all the things that Ron really wants, one of his brothers has done before. So it's really sad, and it brings a new side of like not sadness. That's the wrong way to say it, but we feel sad for Harry because he grew up this way, but then we also see another negative trait of another like family, like a family. Like Ron definitely has an amazing family, but there's negative parts of it that affected Ron.
His family isn't like perfect, even
Yeah.
though Harry might like love the Weasleys and want to be part of them. Like Ron's family also isn't perfect. It's not all sunshine and daisies, you know. There's conflict there too. And I really, really love how Harry like immediately when Ron is talking about like how he has to live up to it and how he really hopes he'll be in Gryffindor and definitely hopes he won't be in Slytherin because that's where you know who was and everything. And Harry immediately is like, okay, let's try to change the subject and talk about like scabbers and stuff. I notice you're feeling down. I'm gonna try to change the subject because I understand that you're feeling like pressured and like I don't want you to be hurt. It's so beautiful, and they're like 11, and it's adorable.
Exactly. And then we meet the toadless boy.
Yeah, Nev.
He's actually referred as that. And then we get our Hermione Granger. I forgot how frustrating and annoying Hermione was in the first book.
Mm.
Like you meet her and she's all like snooty, and it's reading that again made me just kind of realize how much character growth she actually had.
Yeah. Imagine if, okay, so Ron grew up in the wizarding world, so he's quite knowledgeable about things that happen. But then suddenly you have like this girl who is like telling you these things that like you already know, but she doesn't think you know.
She's being somewhat passive aggressive. And like I'm not sitting here and judging Hermione. I was super bossy and annoying when I was a kid. I know that. I acknowledge that. And Hermione, as a person, got older, she probably acknowledged it too. It's a realistic person because there definitely are people like that. And again, these kids are 11. I'm not saying that I don't like Hermione. I'm saying that reading this just reminded me how much character development she has throughout these books.
Mm.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I remember when I remember thinking back to something that if I got a letter to Hogwarts, and I'm sure many people would agree, like, I feel like I would act like Hermione too. I'd be so excited about this magical world, and I want to, like, dive into all the books and, like, meet everyone, and I want to learn as much as I can, you know? So, like, I completely understand Hermione's, like, attitude, you know? But at the same time, that doesn't make it okay in a way, you know? Like the way she talked to Ron and Harry, the way she kind of almost like pushed her way into the cabin too. Like Ron is about to do magic and Hermione's like, okay, let's just see it. Like I'm just gonna sit down and like judge you. Which is like understandable in a way because like if I was in her shoes, I'd love to see magic, you know? Like this sounds cool. It's a new spell I've never heard of. But like the way she went about it wasn't great. And the way she was like, oh, that's not a very good spell, is it? Oh, I've tried all the spells and I did them all perfectly, of course. And oh, I know everything about you, Harry. How come you didn't learn about it? Like, if it was me, I would have learned everything, you know? And oh, I know all of these houses, and isn't this house amazing? Like, I can't believe being into their house. Like, you kind of understand her point of view, and like Erica said, I love how she grew over the course of the books, but her first introduction was not a great impression.
Yeah, I think you much betterly explain what I wanted to say. But
Betterly?
yeah, that's basically exactly what I wanted to say.
Is betterly a word?
I don't know. Clearly, you can see that I am not very like eloquent, and if you haven't yet, you will pick up on it.
Your beautiful voice just makes everything you say eloquent. I am like obsessed with the sound of your voice and your accent. It is just so beautiful and like classy.
Oh my god, I've literally never heard anyone like say that before. Like, yeah, I think I'm just annoying to most people.
You're not annoying.
You're not annoying to us.
You're a great addition to our podcast, and we appreciate you very much, Jess.
Thank you.
So we get Malfoy and his Goonies arrive, and we get our first like we see how shitty this guy really is. He just kind of he arrives there and is just kind of rude to Ron, and I like how Harry immediately just sees him being rude and is like, okay, no, I don't want this guy near me, you know? And Ron, I can't remember exactly what he says. He's talking, oh, what is it that Malfoy says? Okay, I have to find that quote.
And how you can tell how like shallow Draco is because he's looking at Harry with such more interest now that he knows that it's Harry Potter, you know? And how Harry's so utterly unimpressed by this. And it's wonderful.
Exactly. Exactly. You kind of tell what kind of person that he is, and can tell that he's not really the best of characters. Personally, I would hate it because, like, I've said before, I was bullied a lot as a kid. And then suddenly I won a competition. I won like this huge like jar of sweets on like a market day. And suddenly all these people who were mean to me were suddenly like trying to be my friend so they could get some sweets. That's literally exactly what like Draco is doing. And it is like the most unattractive, most like disgusting thing. It's horrible.
Yeah, I agree there. But there's this one thing that gives me it's the first moment of Ron's really how protective he is in general of like himself or his family. So this is what Malfoy says. He says this whole thing about how, you know, he should be politer, otherwise he'll go the same way as his parents. But another thing he says is, you hang around with riffraffs like the Weasleys and that Hagrid, and it'll rub off on you. And then both Harry and Ron stood up. Ron's face was as red as his hair. And he says, say that again. And then Malfoy's like, oh, you're going to fight us, are you? Unless you get out now, said Harry, more bravely than he felt. And then one thing that like I just kind of put together here is Wormtail or Scabbers goes and like bites, I think it's Goyle. And I'm just like, the first thing in my mind is like, Wormtail's here defending Ron and Harry? Or is it just like Wormtail being hungry or something?
It's like I think I just put this together too when I was reading the books, and I was thinking back and I was like, I wonder what caused Wormtail to defend. Like, was it because like I always wondered if like Peter, because he was a marauder, he did grow up with like James and Sirius and Lupin and also kind of Lily. Like, does he still care for Harry? Like, is he defending Harry here? Is he like even as when he was like a spy, does he like hate the Malfoys or something and is like kind of fighting against the Malfoys? Is it like their attitudes or something? Is it like does he care at all for like the Weasleys because he is part of the Order? Like I'm very curious what it is that prompted this because I feel like there's so many different ways. Yeah.
Now that you say that, one thing is like Malfoy did mention something about Harry's parents. So like I'm not
Yeah.
defending Wormtail, but I'm thinking at this point, this is probably before like Voldemort is trying to contact him, and he's been playing this role for so long now. So I would think that at this point maybe he probably does feel a bit like remorseful for what he did, and he's trying to. Like, I don't know if he's trying to be a better rat or person, but it's probably just he's not as like pathetic and evil as once Voldemort contacts him.
It's very interesting. I think also, I mean, I guess we'll talk more about this when Pettigrew actually reveals himself, but it makes you remember again that, like, these characters aren't black and white, right? Like, I forgot which of you said it earlier, but yeah, these are all, like, real people, these are not, like, Mary Sue's and stuff, they're characters. And one of the things I love so much about this series is that, like, you can find, I think you can literally, well, maybe not Umbridge, but you can find something in almost every character to, like, understand and empathize with, Like,
Yeah, like
some of these characters are straight black and white. There's good and bad in, like, all of them, even in, like, the villains.
I completely agree. Like, especially the character that, like, especially Eric and I hate, Draco. I, I still find a little bit like that's redeemable in him. Like, he wasn't raised in like a nice, warm, welcoming home. But again, that doesn't excuse him or his like attitude or his behavior.
yeah,
But like, it is that part that you can kind of feel sorry for.
yeah, like for example, Tom Riddle, not Voldemort, Tom Riddle. I mean, he was born in this loveless. He was born in a like without love in his life. He was in an orphanage. Of course, he's going to be this angry, creepy guy. So that's one part of it where it's like you feel bad for him. I'm not at all like liking who he became. He became like this evil, crazy dude. But that's one avenue of seeing that is like there's so many there's like almost every single character in this there's a backstory that you feel like bad for in a way, or something like that along the lines, even like the antagonists. And then we have all my note is literally Hermione Hart. I can't even remember it. They're just bickering, and Ron's like, "Oh, I don't want to be near this girl." La la la. I don't think that their feelings developed there very soon, but I think Ron probably had this feeling of like, this girl is frustrating, but there's something else. Does
There's
that make
something about her.
Yeah, it's like I don't think their feelings for each other really started happening until like later in Chamber of Secrets. And like I don't think they actually realized their feelings for each other until Goblet of Fire, but we're a little ahead there. But it gives you a smile. I don't know. It gives you a little smirk seeing them, their first interactions. But it's like, I like to think that once they're, like, after the battle and stuff, they probably, I imagine, discuss a lot of their interactions and, like, feelings and stuff and how their feelings developed for each other. And I've always wanted to write a fan fiction about that. I've written it in my head. I'll see if I ever actually write it.
And so I know that all three of us met on Tumblr. One thing I found on Tumblr multiple times was like discussions about how Ron and Hermione kind of like flipped the whole like feminine masculine thing, where like Ron was the more feminine sort of one in a way, with like the empathy, the caring, like the headcanon about people have that he's like the one who does the cooking and everything like that. The more like traditionally feminine character who like offers the hero the family, the empathy, like the friendship, while Hermione is the more traditionally masculine one who offers like I don't know, like the intelligence stuff like that, which is of course sexist. But and like in this interaction, I kind of almost saw like the trope of like the little boy like tugging on the pigtails of the little girl because he likes her, and kind of like I almost saw that in the way Hermione was like, oh, you've dirt on your nose and almost like tugging on Ron's pigtails in a little way.
I don't know if I feel like in general, the fandom tends to gender, like, not gender roles or stereotype, but they try to put gender roles, not necessarily traditional gender roles, but gender roles to each character. And I don't really like to think of it that way, especially when they're 11. In my opinion, though, that whole interaction, I mean, if someone came up to me like that, like Hermione did, I would probably feel frustrated. And I think most people would agree there. And, once we go more through this book, we see more of Hermione's good side. I think most people who read this book for the first ever time when it was coming out and we didn't have any spoilers would probably feel the same way. Like, oh, this girl wasn't very nice. She also, I think, in Hermione's head, she was also thinking, like, she's just trying to help them in a way. I always imagine that Hermione probably after that interaction, she probably like went to her dorm and probably overanalyzed every conversation that she had. So it's like it's because, like I said, I was somewhat of like a bossy person when I was younger, knowing myself, and if I was in that situation, I would have probably left and been like, oh, I should have handled that differently. So
Yeah, I think that also speaks a lot about her character. I don't think she ever intends to be malicious or rude or anything like that. Sometimes it just comes out without her realizing. But like her intention is always like kindness and like empathy and stuff. She sometimes just goes about it the wrong way.
Definitely. There's just one quote that I want to bring up here. Ron looked pale under his freckles. I just find that hilarious. He wrote under his freckles. And one more thing that I just love is when they're on the boats and all the first years see Hogwarts for the first time. That was so magical. Like I started singing the Hogwarts, the theme song for like Hedwig's theme came into my head. Like that music is so good. It was that's just what came into my head when they first looked at the castle. And then we literally end with them knocking on the door. And then we go to chapter 7 is the sorting hat. So we get introduced to Minerva McGonagall, who's one of my favorite teachers. They introduce her really well. He says that she's someone that you don't want to cross. I really like that.
McGonagall's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love, and also the introduction of the ghosts was iconic.
Yeah.
The way they flew in and everyone just like freaked out.
I also definitely found the ghosts funny, but also when I first read McGonagall speaking, I just like immediately thought of that like thick Scottish accent.
Yeah.
And
Maggie Smith.
It brought so much joy to me because you just thought of Maggie Smith's like Scottish accent, and it was amazing because it brought so much to the character.
I think in this discussion in general with the books, we're going to try our best not to talk about the movies, but there's specifically the teachers where like the teachers are so well cast that you can't help but picturing or imagining their voices in your head. This is more so the teachers because almost every single teacher was cast really well. So Maggie Smith was a perfect person to cast for McGonagall. But yeah, the thick Scottish accent. You hear it in your head, when one thing like when I'm reading, I always try to like read their lines in my head with the accent, even though I'm like in real life I wouldn't be able to actually speak the accent. I just always do that in my head.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. That's what I did when I was reading it. I was reading it in the Scottish accent, and in real life, I would never be able to really do a Scottish accent, at least not well. But like the same thing, when we get to the next chapter, I was also reading it in Alan Rickman's most like legendary voice of I can't say it now, but you know exactly what I mean.
Yeah,
It's
definitely.
dry, like
Alan
almost sassy.
Alan Rickman was I'm surprised personally. I don't even know. I'm surprised that he didn't get nominated for an Oscar for that role. I think he should have. So next, what we have is we get introduced about the sorting ceremony. And Harry was all worried about, oh, I have to do some magic tests, blah 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 blah. But there's one thing that once they find out that it's just putting on a hat, Ron says, I think he said, "That's it. We put on a hat." Fred was going on about wrestling a troll, and I'm just like, oh, Easter egg. That just made me laugh so much because they do that in a few chapters. It's just, it's these Easter eggs that you find when you go back and read it again, and you didn't see it before because it's like they're literally going to take down a troll soon.
I wouldn't necessarily call that an Easter egg
A hint.
because like the
Foreshadowing?
the fact that
Foreshadowing?
I don't even think it'd necessarily be foreshadowing because it's not like it's implied there that they are going to have to fight a troll. It's just more implying like what pranksters Fred and George are and like the shit that they get up to. But like I personally didn't see it as like a foreshadowing or as an Easter egg. I think an Easter egg is more kind of telling of what's to come or giving clues as what's to come, but I didn't really see that as a clue.
I don't know. When I read it, it was more just like it was more just ironic, or I think likely when J.K. Rowling was writing it, she wrote it to be something kind of funny because when we get to the troll, they'll probably like if people remember back, they'll be like, "Oh, that's funny because they did end up wrestling a troll." So
Okay, yeah, that definitely makes more sense than kind of foreshadowing, but I agree, it really does make it very funny because we all know they do have to wrestle a troll later on
yeah,
in the book.
yeah, totally. J.K. Rowling uses a lot of adjectives. And like some of them I enjoy, some of them not so much. But one thing I've noticed is like when Harry sees all these different people, she uses all these adjectives to describe them. It's just something I noticed. We have our sorting ceremony, so everyone sits on their stool and gets sorted and whatnot. And one thing that I like that I never really put it together was that the sorting hat like covers their eyes. It's just like I think it makes that they do it so that whoever's wearing the hat can just focus on that and not worry about like the other people staring at them, you know?
It also emphasizes how tiny they are, you know? They're
Yeah,
11-year-olds.
true, 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 true. There's one thing I want to ask, and it's been something that's talked about a few times, is when the hat was on Harry, do you think he was considering Slytherin because of Voldemort's Horcrux, or because Harry has a Slytherin side to him?
Oh, I think Harry definitely has Slytherin side to him.
I
Yeah.
completely agree.
How so?
I think Harry, when pushed, can be cunning and like sly and passive aggressive, which I guess isn't necessarily a Slytherin tendency, but which I associate with Slytherins. But I feel like underneath Harry's like hero boy who lived like visage that I feel like he almost feels like he has to keep up. He is kind of like this cunning, sassy, like sharp-tongued boy.
And we see that more in the future.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah. He can be very like resourceful and he can be cunning. And that's not always a bad thing. He's determined to do what he wants to achieve.
I think he definitely feels like he feels like he has to prove himself in a way. And there's one part that breaks my heart was when Harry's like worried that he won't be chosen for any house. That was so sad. Just because like he's like, oh, and then McGonagall will have to send me back, and it was just Harry. It's you in this book. You have all these moments of like Harry has all these amazing firsts that should have been first like such a long time ago in his life. So it's like you have these moments of like you're so happy for Harry, but then you're also feeling bad because these things should have happened such a long time ago.
Yeah. Kind of going off of that question though, do you think that Harry would have fit in Hufflepuff or Ravenclaw?
No.
No, not at all.
Knowing Harry and knowing his strengths, like maybe he could have been in. I think he could have been in Hufflepuff in the first book, but getting to know him and seeing where he went, some of his strongest traits are 100% Gryffindor. So I don't think either of those houses would have been able to give Harry what he needed to do what he did in the future books. You know?
Yeah. I quite agree with that wholeheartedly. I agree. I think maybe in the first book Harry might have been okay in Hufflepuff, but beyond that, definitely not. And even in the first book, I don't want to say he's too ambitious to be in Hufflepuff, but that's definitely not what I'm trying to say.
Don't diss those Hufflepuffs.
Yeah. I just,
you are a Hufflepuff, Jess.
I know.
I agree that I feel like he maybe could have fit in Hufflepuff, but the reason I'm also curious maybe he could have fit in Ravenclaw too, because going back to like chapter 6, in the very beginning, he kind of reminded me of Hermione in a way when he was like,
oh my god, that's amazing. My alarm just went off. And yes, my alarm is the Harry Potter theme song. I swear I forgot that I have one at 12 set as well. Oh my god, that just proves how much of a huge Potterhead I am right there. Mega, I'm sorry that my phone interrupted you. Go ahead.
yeah, well, yeah,
You were saying how Harry could have been Ravenclaw.
Yeah, in the beginning of chapter 6, he seemed genuinely interested in like learning what he could from his textbooks. Like he started reading like history of magic, and he was saying his school books are really interesting, and he was like reading late into the night. And I kind of saw some like it made me think that maybe he could have fit a little bit in Ravenclaw. Like I agree that later in the books, I feel like he grew into someone who has very much Gryffindorish tendencies and maybe some Slytherin tendencies, like we discussed. And he wouldn't have, like older Harry, I think wouldn't have enjoyed being in Hufflepuff or Ravenclaw. But I think 11-year-old Harry maybe could have fit in those two houses, and then he would have grown very differently. I think. In Hufflepuff, maybe like his, I think he would be a lot more focused on the people and like more focused on like making friends instead of just being the hero all the time. And I feel like in Ravenclaw, if he was in Ravenclaw, he would have been a lot more focused on like learning as much as he could.
So last but not least, we have our feast. Once everyone is sorted, and we have our first line that was someone else's in the book and given to Hermione, which is nearly headless. How can you be nearly headless? I'm going to keep a tally. I'm officially keeping a
Oh
tally
dear. Okay.
of all of the lines that were Hermione's in the films, but were someone else's in the book. So we're gonna keep a tally of that, and I'm gonna keep a tally for each book, and then we'll add them all up after we've done each book. And we'll have it'll be like hundreds or something like that. And Harry just being amazed with all the food. I love that part. It's just like he's never seen this much food in his life, and I just think that's super sweet. Not sweet, but just it's nice seeing Harry so excited about all the food, you know?
Yeah, it's adorable. I really loved the discussion that they had later about parents and how Harry learned that like he's not the only like he has two wizard parents. He's also not the only one who's like kind of clueless because like Hermione we know is Muggle-born, and then also when Seamus saying like I'm half and half, like he has a Muggle family too. Like Harry's not weird in this way. There's like a mix of everybody here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's definitely something amazing about like just that child like wonderment about like this new world, first of all, about like this whole new world, this whole new environment, this whole new school. But also again, like you said about like the feast, about how he's never seen such a big feast before, and the words just bring you back to your childhood, and like they bring back all of that like kind of emotion and excitement, all those childhood feelings, feeling all of those things for the first time is so wonderful.
Yeah, I agree there. Definitely. But one sad thing is like when Neville talks about
Yeah.
his uncle and all these things with his magic. Like I
Yeah.
forgot how terrible things were for Neville in the first book. Like I didn't forget it. I knew it was, but this reading it again after I hadn't read it for a while is like it just brings it back of just like, oh poor Neville. I wonder if J.K. Rowling had the plan for Neville already laid out, like when she first started. I think she did. I think she wanted at the end for him to have this big, like, amazing moment. I don't know if she had it exactly planned, but I think she had his character arc somewhat, like, storyboarded. Neville's character arc, in my opinion, is the best character arc in the books. Of just, when I say best, I mean not necessarily my favorite, but more just very impressive's the wrong word to use, but like significant.
Inspiring, I would say.
Inspiring. Yeah, that's a good word to use there.
Yeah. Neville is, yeah, just like seeing how he started out as this like shy kid who somehow ended up in Gryffindor. Like I know that I think when I was first reading the book, I was like, how is this kid in Gryffindor? Gryffindor's supposed to be like the brave people, like the heroes, you know? And then he really comes into that as he grows up. Like you can see those tendencies, like you see those tendencies in the first book as well, when he stands up to the trio. But also, I love how inspired, like it's so inspiring the way he grows from this like shy little kid to this amazing hero, and like, but still retains his adorableness almost. He still retains a like quirkiness. Yeah, that's the better word. And how he still loves herbology so much, and he like stays as like a professor, you know, and like how he doesn't like lose himself to become a hero, but the parts of him, like his personality from the beginning, is what makes him hero. That doesn't make much sense, but
I think everyone understands what you're trying to say. Neville's one of those characters where I think almost every Potterhead acknowledges Neville's story as being one of the best parts of Harry Potter. I just want to talk about how disturbing Harry's dream was at the end of this chapter. Like, that gives you the creeps. And, like, it says, like, Harry didn't remember anything. And I'm just like, it's like, it gives you almost a hint of something, but not really in a way. I've always been jealous of people who got to read these books as they came out, because I didn't get to do that, because when Philosopher's Stone came out, I was 4 months old. So I couldn't really read at 4 months old, but I'm always envious of those people who got to read every book as they were being released without any spoilers. I just I feel the same way with Star Wars with Empire Strikes Back. When, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Star Wars, you need to go and watch Star Wars right now. But spoiler alert, when we find out that Darth Vader is Luke's father, I've always been so jealous of people who got to watch that in the theaters for the first time. I've talked to other Harry Potter fans who explain how exciting it was every time a new book came out. So I'm always jealous of those people. But that dream though was really disturbing.
J.K. Rowling so casually dropped so many disturbing things in this chapter. It's only the first book. She's so casual about so many things in this book. Like that dream. Also, going back to our previous discussion, the way she just casually mentioned the way Neville's home life was, looking back, that wasn't. I feel like that should not have been treated as casually as it was. Like, Neville's uncle tried to drown him.
Yeah.
They dropped him from the upstairs window. That's not great. And then also, the way J.K. Rowling kind of casually explained Harry's home life, and I don't know. I feel like there's definitely a very different tone when we know it's definitely a very different tone from the first book to later books, but also there's a tone in how seriously and realistically I feel like the story almost becomes, because there's so many of these elements that are later treated much more seriously and much more realistically, while over here they're kind of treated as oh, angsty backstory for a protagonist, something like that,
Yeah, definitely. I agree there. I've always wondered, we don't really get much information about what Neville's parents were like. But I always, in my head, I always imagine them being very sweet. Neville kind of struggled with different things, and I imagine them always cheering him on and being like, this happened, but you can keep doing this, you can do that. I always think of it that way in my head. We don't know, we don't have a lot of canon information about Neville's parents, what they were like before they were tortured. So I think Neville would have totally been a mama's boy.
I kind of agree with you there. I think he definitely kind of would have been a mummy's boy in the sweetest, nicest way. Just the way Neville is. I feel like his parents would have been the kindest, nicest parents ever. But aside from that, what we were just speaking about a moment ago is how J.K. Rowling writes these angsty storylines, and that is definitely a sign, not a sign, but it's kind of shows you that these books aren't going to be very light. They're going to be quite deep and quite complex, and it's not just going to end and they lived happily ever after. It kind of just shows us much deeper story that we're going to be told, that is going to be told to children that are normally told these happily ever after stories. And it's quite welcome, I think, that suddenly not children, but suddenly these younger readers, preteens, but these younger readers are finally going to be, not finally, but are going to delve into a world where these things just don't end the way you always imagine, and they don't end ideally all the time. And I think that's quite an exciting and intriguing idea.
Yeah, I I have 2 points here, but one of them is the thing with Philosopher's Stone is it's definitely the lightest, and that there's a lot less like serious things that happen, or intense. But one thing that I like is that we have these sort of really fun moments, but then she adds in these darker moments, which, I think balances it out. I think that she wrote these books so that the people reading them were growing with Harry. So, you first start reading things like chapter books when you're around Harry's age. That's when it starts happening. So I think in my head, I've always kind of imagined that she wrote that purposefully so that the reader is growing up with Harry. So it's relatable in some sense. And so I like that part of it. So now we are going to go to chapter 8, The Potions Master. So this one we get, their first few days at Hogwarts as students. So it's exciting. And there's one point that I have here is he's describing all these things that he sees about, doors and traps, and there's one thing it says about a door saying that he has to tickle the door. It's like, how on earth do you tickle a door? How does that work? What do you do to tickle a door? Like, when I think of tickling, I think of like specific parts on the body, like tickling under the armpits, or like pinching their waist or their knees, and it's like, where would you do that? The part like above your knee where someone pinches it and it tickles? My brother used to always do that to me. It was so frustrating.
Maybe tickle it like right next to the doorknob or something, or like, I don't know. Doors can be tickled too.
I understand it kind of, again, brings us like kind of wonderment and like kind of like this weirdness, and just like also a sense of like humor and a sense of fun, which neither you nor Harry has experienced before.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, we have to mention Peeves, who comes up in this chapter, and it's like, oh my gosh, yes. I know we don't want to talk much about the movie, but like, I just want to comment that they missed out. Peeves is an amazing character. Peeves is an amazing character in the books.
Just they casted him and filmed a few scenes that they decided to cut him out. Just so dumb, because that would have added so much good humor in places where they added bad humor.
He's really the poltergeist, right? Like, he's not like the good mischief almost. He's like the devious mischief, the kind of harmful mischief. Like, what a poltergeist should be.
And I like how they have the Bloody Baron as the only one that can like control him, and it's just like, it's all these, throughout the books we see all these funny things between Mr. Felch and Peeves. It's just, it always makes me laugh. It's like I can't imagine being in his role of having to deal with this frustrating. He's not even a ghost, is he? What is he? I don't totally understand what he is.
I think he's a ghost.
I thought that he wasn't, but yeah, Peeves is I would get so frustrated with Peeves. But he gets a character arc, which I don't mind, which I think is so awesome. But we'll talk about that legendary moment in Order of the Phoenix. But I like how even just the smallest characters get a character arc,
Well, to the point in Deathly Hallows, his like character arc there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But the one that stands out is the one from Order of the Phoenix.
Oh, yeah. But then also, like, one more comment, just like your thing about Filch. Once again, like, you can understand somewhat of Filch's like frustration. Like, a lot of fans really hate Argus Filch because it's like this daughter old strict caretaker who wants to string up the students by their thumbs, But also, you can understand how frustrating it must be to deal with Peeves all the time. So then, once again, Filch is kind of shown to be a real person.
He's the grumpy old guy.
Yeah, not only to deal with Peeves, but to generally deal with like a bunch of prepubescent like tweens who like play pranks on each other and like are just like frankly annoying. Like, teenagers are annoying sometimes. Can we like all admit that? Imagine having to like pick up after them and do all these things with them. It's like, of course it's like frustrating, and I think that's maybe something that people pick up maybe a little bit afterwards. Like, I didn't even really pick it up until we mentioned it now. But like, put yourself in his position. That must be so frustrating.
Yeah.
And exactly, you're right. That is like kind of a, like, you understand why. And even if like you didn't understand that, you still see that he's not evil. Just like Erica said, he's the grumpy old man. But he's not evil. He's not bad. He's just annoying.
Yeah. And also, Jess, you can remind me of this. I mean, spoilers alert, but like later we find out that Filch is a squib, and so he can't cast magic. Can you imagine being in Hogwarts, seeing all these little kids learning magic and everything, have to clean up after them when you can't do magic, like having someone shoved in your face? That's horrible.
Yeah. There's one thing that I read which made me really angry. So one thing to let you guys know about me is body positivity is one of my biggest passions in my entire life. I love it. It saved me from a really dark place at certain points in my life, and it's encouraging people to feel confident in their bodies is something that I love. But there's this line I read which frustrated me. He was talking about Professor Sprout being dumpy, and I'm like, that upset me so much. Like, there is a problem of fat shaming in these books. And it's really sad that, some of the adjectives that are used to describe people aren't the best. I know that when you're writing books, you have to use a fair bit of adjectives because there's no pictures to see. You're seeing it in your head. I feel like dumpy wasn't the best word to use because when I think of Professor Sprout, she seems like strict, but she also has this sweet, brilliant side of her. And of all the teachers, we don't really get a whole lot of Professor Sprout, but I feel like dumpy is the worst word to use for that. So that's one part that I didn't like that adjective there.
Yeah. And for any listeners who don't know what dumpy means or anything like that, like it technically means short and stout, but it's also a slang term for someone who's stupid. So it definitely is not a positive word.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I think dumpy is such a wrong word to use, especially for how wonderful she is. Even like the word plump would be better because the word plump in general like brings up positive kind of feelings, although that might not also be correct either.
I feel like both of those adjectives aren't the best to use, but it's also like she's trying to come up with an adjective to describe their appearance. So it's difficult, like, to come up with an adjective that everyone's happy with or something. So it's like, but yeah, plump is, although I don't like plump being used to describe someone, it's a less offensive one to use than dumpy.
I'm actually a little curious now because I just went back through my text, and J.K. Rowling did use plump to describe Molly Weasley. So I'm curious why she decided to use a more negative slang term to describe Sprout.
Yeah. And then we get introduced to each of our like main teachers, which I think is cool. And I like how each of the like heads of house, like they each kind of are different in significant ways. Like we have like Professor Flitwick, who's like this tiny little dude, and I found it funny of just like him falling off of all the books he was standing on. Professor Flitwick kind of reminds me of myself in a way of just being this short, kind of clumsy person. I am concerningly clumsy. Like, I will trip over nothing, like, very often. Like, one of my friends will just be out and about, and I'll just, like, start falling over, and he'll catch me and be like, why did you fall over? And I'll just answer, like, I have no idea. It's like, if I wasn't here, you'd crack your head open. It's like, yep, probably.
Yeah.
it's nice, being introduced to each of the different professors. And we also have a transfiguration with Professor McGonagall, which was an interesting one. Seeing all that, and of course Hermione is the only one that was able to turn her matchstick into a needle. And we have this this ironic line when he talks about potions. It says potions was the worst thing to happen so far. It was the worst thing to happen to Harry so far, and I'm just like, oh, Harry, you got a lot of shit that's gonna happen, honey.
Yeah.
Potions was nothing.
Oh no, a bad potions lesson.
Yeah,
You just kind of think, oh, how naive he is.
yeah.
And
Like, that's cute.
yeah, exactly. You kind of think very condescending thoughts towards him.
Sometimes to this book, I feel like, because we know the rest of the series, we can all just be like, oh, Harry, you don't know what's coming to you. Or
Yes.
to all the characters, like, you just don't know
Harry,
what's coming to you.
Sweetheart.
Totally.
I love, you have no idea.
Yeah. And then we get introduced to Snape. Like, Snape is like this. Oh my God! Snape was horrible. It's just like everything he said was just like frustrating, and you're just, I think you're totally meant to hate Snape, and I think anyone would hate Snape. Like, the only time that we start getting somewhat more depth to his character is maybe Order of the Phoenix, or like there's random moments spread out, but the Order of the Phoenix is when we start getting a little bit more like that's when his character is more debated in Order of the Phoenix, when we get that first flashback there. But because his horribleness was so downplayed in the films, it's like people forget how just mean he was. And like all that loving Malfoy or whatever, like it's just Snape. Ugh, I can't imagine actually having a teacher like that.
Like, how blatantly he favors Slytherin. And, like, Harry kind of, like, mentions that he wished McGonagall favored him, but, like, none of the other teachers favor their houses and stuff like that. And then it's just like, I mean, I admit that, like, sure, yeah, like Erica said, there are points where Snape is kind of shown to be something a bit more than just this giant bully. Like when during we're gonna come to this, of course, during the Quidditch match later in this book. Spoiler alert: when he's not the dude trying to murder Harry in like Prisoner of Azkaban, when he has like a token protection of like the trio from Lupin turned into a werewolf. It's like there are points where like a reader can question, is this really all that it seems? Like, is there something more to him? But it's kind of drowned out by how mean and bullying he is to these 11-year-olds, and like how just straight up cruel. And like it seems so needless, like it just seems to come out of nowhere.
I definitely agree with that as well. Yeah, for a teacher of all people to act like that towards students, like especially these new young students who don't know anything, they don't know better, for like to have this teacher suddenly like literally verbally bully them and emotionally bully them is very devastating. I mean, I'm sure we've all been that one in class where we didn't have our hands raised, we were just like listening, and then like suddenly the teacher picks on you even though you didn't have your hand raised, and you're like, well, dude, what the fuck? I didn't ask to like tell you the answer. I like there's a reason my hand isn't up. I'm wanting to find out the answer, and all the time you're basically just like asking yourself like, why are you asking me this? And you're confused, and that is even more so how these students are feeling, because not only does he just pick on you even though you didn't put up your hand, he bullies you for it and he shames you in front of like the whole class, and that as well like makes them feel like just less, of themselves. Again, that is just pure emotional abuse, and it's terrible.
Well, I will admit this is the first time that we saw, well, maybe not the first time, but there's another time where we saw a bit more of sassy Harry come out when he's like, I think, like, I don't know the answer, but I think Hermione does. Why don't you try
Yes,
her?
exactly.
Which
That's
is
amazing.
He loses a point for the cheek.
Yeah.
Sassy Harry just makes me happy. The sass, just laying out the sass there, and it just shows how perfect Ginny and Harry are for each other.
Exactly, right?
One thing I wish would be really cool is seeing Ginny in class.
Oh my gosh,
Seeing
yes.
how she would behave in class. That would have been an interesting thing to see.
Yeah,
Because like
I
Ginny's the
agree.
character where like growing up with all these older brothers, like you see how like she does not take anyone's shit. Like she stands up for herself and she is like a badass. And so yeah.
Ginny's
We don't get to see. Sorry, we don't get to see much of Ginny in this book, obviously. But obviously, we definitely see it later, and I agree. Also, we see how suited Harry and Ginny are for each other. But yeah, just that the sassy mouth that Harry has on him is just the it just makes everything better. It kind of just takes the situation from like a darker situation to like a very light and funnier turn.
Yeah, and the whole like the potions class in general. It like I said, reading these books as they were coming out when you didn't have any spoilers. Something like this, it grabs your attention. You're kind of like, why is he so mean to Harry? Like obviously, he's meaner to Harry than he is to anyone else, and there's clearly a reason. So it draws the reader in. I wish that the films showed more about how mean Snape was to some of them. And then we have poor Neville like melting his cauldron, and I'm just like, every time Neville has these moments, I'm just like, oh, I want to give him a big hug.
Yeah.
Just tell him everything's gonna be okay.
Yeah. If you're already anxious and having like being yelled at and stuff, and then
Yeah.
this happens, it just gets worse. It's like
And I always like to think that Professor Sprout, like I said, we of all the teachers, we really don't get much of Professor Sprout, but I always like to think that one of the reasons why he got into herbology so much was mainly like I like to think that Professor Sprout was like supportive of Neville in that if he made a mistake, she would help him and teach him, and him being good at herbology, he probably really held on to that because it was something that gave him confidence.
Yeah, completely. I mean, that nice little confidence boost, as opposed to his potions teacher literally calling him an idiot
Yep.
in like one of his first potions classes. I mean, it definitely brings a sense of like discomfort and like dread to like that teacher and that lesson.
yeah.
To end this chapter, we have our first visit with Hagrid.
Yeah.
Oh, first though, I want to mention one thing here is they talk about the mail, and one thing that I just kind of love is like Harry hasn't been getting any mail, but I like how Hedwig, she just kind of goes and checks in with him, and he said she nips his ear and has some toast or something, and I think it's sweet that she's just kind of there. She's like she's his first friend, in a way, and it's like people talk about Hedwig a fair bit, and she's just an owl, but she's just a constant, like, she's the only character, if you consider her a character, that has been with Harry at every single moment since he bought him. So it's like, I just thought there was a little sweet thing of Hedwig coming in every day to just say hi, basically, even if he doesn't have any mail. So, but then we have Harry and Ron visit Hagrid, and there's just one line that I want to say here that I really really love, where they meet Fang, and he says, Like Hagrid, Fang was clearly not as fierce as he looked. And I love that because, like I've said many times about Hagrid, you get this idea. You see him like this big, hairy, scary dude, but then he's just a total mushy sweetheart as well. So it's, that whole meeting with them was it's always it was cute.
It definitely was very cute, and also just like you were saying about Hedwig, I completely agree with that. That was so sweet, and I kind of just like you love the little interaction. I love that like Harry feeds her little pieces of toast and everything. I think it's so adorable, just in general, that these owls and these like pets have that kind of relationship with their owners. And then the other thing that made me smile was the fact that like Hedwig went back to like the little owlery with the other Hogwarts owls. I think that just made me happy, and I don't know. I think it's just because like they have like a whole little owlery, like all the owls have their own home as well, and I don't know. That just made me happy, but that's probably just like the animal lover part of me talking. But the main thing I wanted to mention was the fact that like Hagrid wrote a whole letter to Harry. Like he didn't just like come up to Harry during breakfast or anything. He like wrote a whole letter, which is so cute. Like it's just like must have made Harry feel so special. And like just like that kind of pureness and that kindness. Just not everyone has it, but Hagrid does, and it's illustrated so brilliantly and so wonderfully in the text that he, even though it's like a letter might not sound as like much to like a boy who's had nothing, it's just a nice kind letter asking you to tea is like the sweetest, most inviting thing that he must have like received.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely adorable. I love the interaction between Harry and Hagrid, especially in the first book when Hagrid's just so, like you said, so like open and inviting and kind.
Hagrid's actually Harry's first friend. Made a mistake there.
Because that's true, yeah. Oh, that's adorable. But yeah, I also think it, like, once again, speaking with like the foresight of the rest of the books, Harry's reaction to Fang's kind of interesting because like we learn later that probably the only dogs that Harry's really had a lot of interaction with are Aunt Marge's dogs, who aren't great. And then to have this dog, this giant thing, come and like almost attack them with like love and affection. Because I'm kind of curious, like if like what Harry was like. I think there. I feel like it would have been a little bit realistic for Harry to be freaked out a bit. You know?
Yeah. And then we have the news about the break-in at Gringotts. I always just laugh at this about how everyone's like, "Oh, you're dumb to break into Gringotts," and I'm just like, "Oh, honey, they don't just break into Gringotts. They break into Gringotts and steal a dragon and break the ceiling." I just
It's like talk about subtlety. They have none.
mentioned it. It's just like, it just makes me laugh. And then yeah, it basically ends the chapter. Harry's wondering if there's more to this than Hagrid is saying, and there is, and we will get to see that.
It's like that transition from the sweet, like love and like just familiarity of the last couple chapters. Oh, was it the last couple chapters? I don't know. Of the last, yeah, of the last while, where like Harry's like seeing all these wonderful experiences and like meeting these great people and like finally feeling like he belongs and stuff. To like the start of like this mystery, you know? What is this break-in? Like, what does it mean? What's going on?
Exactly. Oh, we forgot to mention Professor Quirrell.
Oh yeah. Spoiler alert, boldly.
The plot twist with Professor Quirrell is really well written because you would not have guessed it at all. Not at all. Professor Quirrell seems just like annoying. Professor Quirrell did a good job of pretending to be this character, even though he was like this evil dude that was sharing a body with this really even more evil dude. So, you know, I use the word dude a lot just so you guys know that's a heads
Oh, I
up.
do too, definitely.
Yeah, like Voldemort wasn't a cool dude. He was just
He was like evil and insane and just like this
he was
no
a
like
cool dude.
no
He was
goodness.
an evil dude.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious if Voldemort wasn't trying to hide between the Sister Center and Quirrell facade, you know. What kind of teacher would Quirrell, what kind of teacher would Voldemort have been? Like, would he have been a good Defense Against Dark Arts teacher? Like, do you guys think he would have been a good teacher?
No. If you made a mistake, he would just like murder you. He would. He wouldn't be teaching defense against the dark arts. He'd be teaching dark arts. He would be teaching the kids how to do dark magic. I don't know. He would. I don't see him enjoying people at all. So it's like literally, if you did something wrong, he would kill you. That's what he does. It's like, oh, I don't like what you did. You're dead now.
I think that kind of brings us to the end of our episode.
So next episode, we'll be discussing chapters 9 and 10 of Philosopher's Stone. Chapter 9 is the Midnight Duel, and chapter 10 is Halloween. So if you want to read along with us, make sure to read those episodes before those episodes, not those episodes. Make sure to read those chapters before next time. You know, this was a really fun discussion. We got to discuss a lot more about characters, and it was these were more interesting chapters. So it was a lot of fun discussing them with all you guys and whatnot. And Philosopher's Stone is always an interesting one to talk about because it's it's the beginning. It doesn't have as much interesting stuff happening, but it's an introduction and brings you into the story.
It's nostalgia for me.
Yeah,
Dude.
Definitely.
Yeah, we'll see you guys next time. This is Erica saying goodbye.
Snega saying goodbye.
Just saying goodbye.
Thanks for listening, everyone.